Thank you for joining me. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make a mother. No, I do not mean the woman who gave birth to you. What a mother is, in this case, is an active yeast culture used in the making of bread. It is also known as a sourdough starter, yeast starter, or proto-dough. I'm going to show you how to do this starting with active dry yeast. Stay tuned for some of my later videos where I will show you how to grow it from scratch. This one, you're going to be starting with active dry yeast. Now, what you're going to need to start off with is all-purpose flour, a jar, active dry yeast, water, sugar is optional but recommended, and also optional but recommended is one of these. You can steal them out of a shaker bottle, or you can buy like a dozen of these off Amazon for like $2 or something now. I bought them like a year ago. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our jar, a nice clean jar. I'm going to add the flour to it. And for this size of jar and for the amount of mother I'm going to be making, I'm going to be going with 3/4 of a cup. Normally, when I'm dealing with flour, I measure by weight. In this case, volume is sufficient because it's not that specific. It's not important to get it exact. Just roughly 3/4 of a cup. 1/4. Half-ish. 3/4-ish. Next, I'm going to add that same volume in water. Water is very specific in this. If your municipal water supply has chlorine in it, you can't use it. It will kill your yeast. There are ways to get around that, such as pouring the water and letting it sit for 24 hours. The chlorine should dissipate. It's best to just filter your water, or if need be, use bottled water. I live in the country, so my water isn't chlorinated. And there goes 3/4 pre-measured, chlorine-free water. And for this, I'm going to use 1 teaspoon of sugar. Not required, recommended. You can also use honey or any other natural sweetener. And what that's going to do is boost your yeast production faster. Next, I'm going to take my active dry yeast, just store-bought active dry yeast. I'm going to put in, honestly, it doesn't matter how much you put in. You can put in a pinch, you can put in a teaspoon. Just how much you put in depends on how fast they're going to work. So since I have the teaspoon measure out, I'm going to put in a teaspoon of yeast. It's a lot of yeast. Now here, so I'm going to take this. You don't actually need this, it just makes the mixing a lot easier, and you will be mixing this a lot. In it goes, on goes the lid. Shaky, shaky, shaky. Mix up all the water, flour, yeast, sugar, everything in a nice homogeneous mixture. Yes, I said homogeneous. Now, if you look in there, it should have a consistency and appearance kind of like pancake batter. Good job. Now, I'm going to take out the centerpiece of this lid. I'm going to throw it over there in my sink because I'm going to wash that later. I'm going to take this. You can use plastic wrap, loosely attached or with a few holes poked into it, or a very loosely knit piece of cloth. This is just a tea towel terry cloth thing that I cut into pieces because I've got several of these things going on. This just goes right over top. This part is especially important if you want to make sourdough. If you're not making sourdough, you can skip this step and just put plastic wrap on as long as it's loosely fitted. Let a little bit of air in there. But this What this does is it will keep dust, dirt, mites, various other nasties out of the jar, while at the same time allowing air to get in and out and natural born yeast. There is natural born yeast just floating in the air around you no matter where you are, unless you're in like Arctic zone or some such nonsense. And this will capture natural born yeast and get it in here to mix and breed with your store-bought yeast, which will give you a much better flavor, particularly with sourdough. And the flavor that it will create will depend a lot upon the specific breed of yeast that is native to your region, which is why San Francisco sourdough is so famous. And you can't really replicate it outside of San Francisco. You can get close if you import San Francisco sourdough yeast, but this is effectively what you got. Now this little guy is going to sit right there on the counter in full view. Doesn't have to be warm. Don't let it be cold. Just going to sit on the counter for 24 to 48 hours. Now what's going to happen, if you watch in there, it will start to foam up. That is the yeast doing its thing. It's going to foam up and eventually will start to separate. After 24 to 48 hours, you can take the cloth off, put the cap back on, put it in the fridge, and as long as you feed it about once a week, it should be good. What do you feed it? 50-50 mix of flour and water. And this is a starter that I've had going for a while. You can see it's got a little bit of separation there. This little guy was just fed yesterday, and after feeding you leave it on the counter for about 24 hours. It's just fed yesterday because I used most of it while making sourdough, which is currently rising. Been almost 24 hours. And that is how you make a mother. Stay tuned for further instructions on how to make it without store-bought yeast.